Well, welcome to another study in the book of Revelation, and we are starting chapter 5 today. And what I'm going to do today is basically introduce to you a concept, a picture that you're going to need to understand so much of the rest of the book. And it has to do with a vision of a scroll. The scroll and the Lamb would be the title of chapter 5. But unless you understand this scroll, you will not be able to understand a whole lot of the rest of the book of Revelation, because so much of the book of Revelation is patterned after this scroll and the whole concept of the scroll. So let me just read you a couple verses of Revelation chapter 5, and then I will give you some detailed information about the scroll. And here we go. Revelation chapter 5, beginning with verse 1. And I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll written inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. Then I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose its seals?" And no one in heaven or in the earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look at it. So I wept much, because no one was found worthy to open and read the scroll or to look at it. So here's the scene. In chapter 4, we've been introduced to the throne, and now he sees that in the hand of the one seated on the throne is a scroll, and it is a sealed scroll. And so much of the rest of the next few chapters of Revelation, and much of the whole book, has to do with this scroll. So what is this scroll? What is it all about? Well, the scroll has to do with obtaining the title deed to redeem land. And in Israel, land was always to be kept within a family, will always be able to be redeemed by the family, rather. And so there were certain laws that are very foreign to us, but God's law said that land could be sold. It could be occupied. It could be built upon by someone else. But at certain intervals of time, it would have to revert back to the original family. And there were laws of redemption that would allow someone else, a relative of the one who had sold the land, to come along and redeem that land. And so this scroll has to do with the redemption of the land. And it's quite a different process. So pay attention, take some notes as to what this process was. Well, in the process of redeeming land, it had to be a kinsman, it had to be a relative of the one who originally had the land. Only a relative could redeem the land. But the process required 2 scrolls. One scroll was called the right of possession. And this scroll was open to the public. And written in this scroll was who now had legal right to occupy the land. And secondly, it was written within who was the original owner of the land. Now this scroll was open to the public. Anybody could come along and read it. It wasn't sealed. So that's not the scroll that's involved here. If you want to see some more references to this, go to Jeremiah 32, 6 through 15, where Jeremiah goes through this whole process involving these scrolls. But the scroll that we see in Revelation chapter 5 is what was called the terms of redemption. And this was not open to the public. It was sealed with 7 seals. And only the elders of the city would know what was written therein. It can only be opened upon a finding of a qualified redeemer. And inside this scroll was written what the land would cost to redeem, all liens and debts that had been encumbered upon that land, any judgments against that land. Also, if anything had been built on that land that really shouldn't be there, that would have to be removed, and the cost of removal, and the occupants that had to be removed. All of these things were written out on the inside of this sealed scroll. And it was not open to the public. So if you were a qualified redeemer or a redeemer, let's say you were a relative, and you came along and you said, I want to get this land back from my relatives, I want to see if I qualify. Well, they would not tell you how much it would cost. They would not tell you everything that had to be done. Rather, they knew the amount that would be required. But they would then examine you and they would see if you were worth the amount it would cost to redeem that land. And so they would want to know how much money you had. They would want to know what kind of real estate or other assets you would have that could be liquidated. And they would not tell you what the price was. They would also not tell you other things that needed to be done on that land. They would simply examine you to see if you were worth that much. Now, of course, today none of us would buy land that way. None of us would buy a house not knowing what it would cost. We just wouldn't do it. But in Bible times, they would. And they would not do it because of the land itself. They would do it out of a sense of obligation and love for their relative who had lost the land. And so the elders would then decide, this redeemer, potential redeemer, he qualifies because he's worth. Let's just throw out some numbers to make it simple. Let's say that inside that scroll was written it would cost $100,000 to buy this land back, and there was another $20,000 worth of renovations that had to be done, and also the occupants that were now on the land would be removed. So they're going to have to pay at least $120,000 and maybe a little bit more to get people off the land. So they say, well, it's going to cost about $130,000, $40,000. Let's call it $140,000. Well, they wouldn't tell you that that's the number. They would simply inspect you. How much money do you have? How much real estate do you have? Are you worth $140,000? If you were worth the amount that was written inside this scroll to redeem it back, if you were worth that amount or more, they would say, okay, you qualify. Now, do you want to do the transaction? And if you said yes, you would then begin opening the seals, and whatever was written therein, you had to pay or do. So it might cost you everything you have. It might cost you a tenth of what you have. It might cost you half of what you have. You wouldn't know. You would have to say, am I willing to give up everything potentially to get this land back for my loved one or for my relative? And so that's what's really going on. As soon as the commitment was made, as soon as the seal was broken, you then had to pay it. And there was no going back. It couldn't be resealed. In other words, you make the commitment to pay when you didn't even know if it would cost you everything. The elders have already examined you and said, no, you can do it. You have the cash and the assets to go ahead and do this. You qualify. And here's the term they would use. You are worth it. You are worthy. And so now what we see represented here is the scroll that's in the hand of the one sitting on the throne actually represents what it will cost to buy back all of creation and all of humanity. That's what's been lost because of sin. And there's someone else occupying the land that shouldn't still be there. And there have been things that have been built upon this land that must be torn down. The issue is not just how much the land is worth, but is the Redeemer worth that amount? If he is, he qualifies. If the Redeemer is found worthy of what is owed, he can choose to execute the redemption by opening the scroll. But once he opens the scroll, he must pay all it says and do all it requires. The scroll can never be resealed. It must be fulfilled once it's opened. The redemption price must be immediately paid. The removal of occupants must be then executed, and all repairs must be done in a very timely manner. And when all of that is done, the money's been paid, the occupants have been taken off the land, the renovations have been done, then it will be given back to the original owner. Now this is the whole analogy that's being used here. And let me just fill in the blanks. God created this earth to be reigned and ruled over by man. He was to have dominion. He was to have rulership. But man sinned and lost, as it were, the title deed to earth. And another now occupies it. And things have been built on this land, in this world, that were never of God. And so they have to be dealt with and removed. And the occupants have to be driven away. And the price has to be paid for that land. You see, this land was lost by Adam's sin. And here's the vision. Who will qualify to buy back a lost creation? It's not only our souls, it's all of creation that has been affected by sin. Notice, I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll written inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. Immediately the Jewish mind would know what that scroll was. It was the terms of redemption, and to buy back all of God's creation. Then I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose its seals?" In other words, we've got to find someone who's related and who is worth whatever it will cost. And notice in verse 3, "And no one in heaven and on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look at it. So I wept much because no one was found worthy to open and read the scroll and look in it." In other words, John says, now it's time for earth to be redeemed back and turned back over to its original owners. But there's no one found worthy in heaven and earth that is worth that much. Who has the resources to buy it all back? No man qualifies, because all of us have fallen under the same curse of sin. None of us have what it's worth to buy back a fallen humanity. And so John is weeping. Now in the rest of Revelation, you're going to see these seals open in chapters 6 through 8. And every time a seal is open, enemies have to be removed from that redeemed land. Chapter 13, the beast of the sea. Chapter 13 and 19, the beast of the earth. In chapters 15 and 16, there's more judgments being poured out. There's a harlot system in chapter 17 that has to be removed. There's a Babylonian system that has to be torn down in chapter 18. And Satan himself has to be dealt with in chapter 12 and 19 and 20. And then there's renovations that must be done. A new heaven and a new earth in chapters 20 and 21. The land is then to be given back to the original occupants. We are to be reigning and ruling. Those who overcome are to be reigning and ruling on this land. And this sets the stage for the rest of the book of Revelation. It has to do with the opening up of this scroll. That who is worthy to redeem back all of creation? And then to drive off the occupants that shouldn't be there. Who has that power? And who then can recreate and rebuild what was lost so that it can be restored once and forever to God's order of things and given back to those that God originally ordained would reign and rule with him over this earth. Isn't that a beautiful picture of what's going to unfold in the rest of the book of Revelation? But John is weeping because no one is found worthy. But then he hears another voice in verse 5. But one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has prevailed," or overcome, "to open the scroll and to loose its 7 seals." This is a dramatic moment in this whole book, because now we're going to find out who is worthy, who qualifies, because they're worth the amount that's needed or more. Who qualifies to buy back the fallen creation and to buy back fallen man? Who qualifies? No human being does. That's why John is weeping. But then he hears a voice. There is one who has overcome, who has prevailed, and the one who has prevailed is worthy to buy back. He's worthy to take the scroll and start opening it. And every time a seal is opened, something must be done. And so in the future chapters, you'll see a seal open and then things happen. You'll see another seal open and then things happen. Several chapters in this book have to do with the ramifications of one being worthy to take this scroll and buy back. Well, who is that one? He says the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He says the Root of David has prevailed to open the scrolls and loose its 7 seals. Verse 6, I looked, and behold, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb. Well, we're going to get into that next lesson. Who is that lamb? What is that lamb all about? But there is one who has prevailed and has been inspected and found worthy to buy back a lost humanity, to take the scroll and start opening the seals and pay what needs to be paid and do what needs to be done, that God's original creation will come back into its original order, and God will then turn it back over, and we will reign and rule with him forever. Oh, it's going to be an exciting study. So next time we'll start looking in more detail at this Lion of the tribe of Judah who has prevailed and who is worthy to open this scroll.
For from you